the title of the paper is African Speculative Cultures in STEM Education, Using Narrative Evidence in Research, Policy, and Activism. And looking at STEM education, what we've seen is that it is grounded on rational empirism, and it's more of reason and empirical evidence where we rely on logic, objectivity, and trying to test hypotheses and theories. And what we asked our team, and looking at all those different scenarios within the STEM education so that we can be more holistic in our knowledge bases, and also basically being critical and not just taking the technology that you are developing or the models that you are running just for the sake of running them, but also looking at the other dynamics of knowledge. And basically what the speculative fiction help us to do is to rehearse the future before we actually live it, which is quite important. And there's quite some interest in terms of how we can infuse science fiction into STEM careers. And there was a survey by one of Canada. These details are published in his work on why Africa needs to create more science fiction that is featured in Ome Nana, Speculative Fiction Magazine issue number 5. And what he asked the respondent was if they believe science fiction is useful to people in STEM careers, and 84% of them actually said yes. And some of them had actually not even read any speculative fiction stories. But when he narrowed down the sample to those who had actually read science fiction stories, the answer was actually 100%. And therefore, it is now up to us to see how then do we advance these interests to see that we can actually be able to move beyond, because yes, I think University of Nairobi could actually be the first one to pilot this, and we need to move it to other universities across Africa. And of course, the grounding on the African cultural cultures, the tales we tell, the proverbs, the riddles, the art and the culture. We see a lot of science in them, but these has actually not been appreciated. And what we've seen actually in the Kenyan context, given the case of the early warning system, the meteorological department is actually working with the traditional rainmakers, which for us is the appreciation of what exactly they are able to do, and their work is actually based on science, just that it hasn't been documented. The approach we took is that we had small groups, seminars, for 4 weeks. That was both at Imperial College London and also at the University of Nairobi. And for us, we had quite a diverse group of students, both at undergraduate level and also at MSc level. And they were also dealing with they were from different disciplines. We had students undertaking their masters in business research. Some were also, some in sustainable management and operations. And we also had agricultural economics undergraduate students who I also teach. And during the first 2 weeks, we basically wanted to motivate them and show how does science fiction come into what exactly they do in class, into the different subject areas. And we did that by taking them, by discussing different speculative narratives. And we'll be able to look at some of the issues that were coming out from them. And then they would, from those early discussions, and looking at the different things that I imagine from these stories, they would sit back and then start thinking of what kind of essays could they write, what are things that they're actually interested in. And by the third week, they already come up with a topic, and they use the speculative narratives to start developing some of the content to their essays. But beyond the essays, they were also looking at other published literature that is in line with the topics that they had actually selected. And then, of course, they developed their essays, and then, of course, there was a part of assessment. Some of the speculative narratives or stories that we were looking at were Embers by Wallet and Afrenigia, The Batman, Animals on the Run, Harmful Driver, and also the Satellite Charmer. There were quite a number, I think there were 6 in total. And these stories are actually rooted in African context, helping the student to sort of relate with these stories, and also get to examine contemporary STEM issues of climate change, genetic engineering, AI, clean energy, and all that. And what we discovered is that when you look at all these contemporary issues, they actually affect communities that we are part of. And for us to be able to address these issues, for instance, climate change, we cannot just sit in the labs as a scientist and do our research there, but we need other disciplines for us to be able to solve these issues holistically. So it invites us to collaborate with other disciplines. And these are the master's level group. And then we also had the undergraduate. So what we do is that we would share the stories beforehand. They would read the stories, and then you gather and then separate them into the two groups, the master's level students and then the undergraduate students. They would sit down now and interrogate the stories and find what themes are actually emerging from the stories. Of course, we had some guiding questions from the previous group seminars from Imperial College, but we encouraged them to go beyond what was there, to also see whether they are also able to identify things they can actually relate with. For instance, looking at some of the speculative narrative, the Handful Driver, one of the quotes is that I present to you my newest groundbreaking undertaking, my novel offering to the state of commercial transportation in Lagos and soon to be the whole of Nigeria. Here we see Ogadayo, who is a very enthusiastic innovator and entrepreneur, but unfortunately all his ideas don't seem to work, and actually even one of his trusted drivers doesn't give the harm form, which is sort of like a flying vehicle, which is different from what they are used to, that actually also work. And true to his fears and skepticism, it actually doesn't work. And some of the things that will emerge from such a narrative is resistance to change. And for us as scientists, as we develop innovations and technologies, it is how are people going to take these innovations? Are they going to take them up? And for them to be able to take them up, then they should be able to address their needs, and they need to also perceive them positively. There are, of course, issues of blind optimism, issues of entrepreneurial trap. And here we see Ogadayo, his innovation, the harmful is more of a technological speculation rather than a genuine innovation that would actually address the transport issues in Lagos. And then, of course, they try to adapt this technology to sort of look like what is there locally, by those adaptations also don't really seem to work. And of course, the supportive infrastructure, and therefore we are able to interrogate such a narrative and be able to ask ourselves so many questions and get to the depth of it, which is quite important. For the embers, it's about unjust energy transitions. It features the Kawashida cells, which they define as one solution to many problems, which is what every climate scientist wants, but it results in loss of livelihoods, and dreams are actually shattered when we look at the protagonists there who work in that particular case. And we ask ourselves, as we transition to green economies, as we are doing, are they just in terms of equity? Are communities involved? Or are we So we need to look at all those dynamics as we transition. Then, of course, we had the Leafyman and the Bat Monkey. I'm glad Leafyman is here, the of the Leafyman. We also the issues of genetic drives and around biotechnology failure. And here the story was featuring Japia, and one of the quotes is that they had enough water, a red brick house with green iron sheet roofing stood at the edge of the orchard. It belonged to a wealthy farmer of butter who owned an acre of oranges. His family had fled the morning wisdom, which is now the mutated Anopheles mosquito attacked, not knowing that the best place to hide was right in their backyard. And here the story is simply referring indigenous knowledge, and what came as we were discussing is what is the place of indigenous knowledge in modern day science. And then, of course, the bat monkey. And here we have quite several quotes. We had, for instance, Kahindo kept saying what we had filmed was not a flying monkey, but Chase is not him. It is my grant. We are going to catch one. Chase is the PI of this particular project. I do not want you to fail, but they know nothing about our people. They are not flying monkeys. We needed money. Without guards and rights, poachers would destroy everything. And this is Kahindo talking to Myers in absence, of course, of Chase and another team member that was with them. And for Kahindo, who is the conservator, his interest was actually now to protect the wild animals from poachers and all that. But we see Chase is chasing popularity. And therefore, what we see is ideological differences in collaborative research between global north and south, is what we encounter every day as researchers. And of course, we had the other stories, for instance, the satellite Chama, that they're using a beam to extract resources, and also include environmental degradation and community wishing to liberate themselves from these particular issues they are in. And then, of course, the animals of the land. Of course, the title basically tells us how the humans have actually invaded their habitats, and that is why the animals are out there. So what was our experience is being able to bring these lived experiences into classroom dialogues, and also being able to look at all these contemporary STEM issues or the current development issues, and helping students to sort of see them from a humanistic, from a human angle, and also being able to be critical even as they read these stories. And then, of course, we had essays. Just picking a few of them from the students. We had one on binary class, AI meets African traditional medicine. And for this, just an excerpt of that particular essay. And the student, I'll do this quickly. Two fiction narratives explore how artificial intelligence is used as a source of healthcare innovation in different ways, as it is intertwined with traditional African medicine. In Mother of Invention, a smart house OB3 protects its pregnant occupant from deadly genetically modified pollen while keeping cultural knowledge in its core functionality. And of course, this particular student sort of looked also at the human and how it brings about the traditional medicine, and it's trying to see how then we can sort of integrate the two. And then, of course, we had another one that was looking at balance between innovation and ecology. And the story was based on the Afri-Museum and the Mami Waterworks by Russell Nichols. And we've already looked at this, and let me skip this because of time. But let me address the issues of misconceptions about infusing applied science fiction into STEM. And there's that feeling that we then possibly moving from being objective to subjective and losing the scientific rigor, but we are not, because what applied science fiction is doing is deepening our understanding through a systems thinking, where we are able to look at all the different issues and also the issues of interdisciplinarity. They're, of course, not being applicable, but we see that it is quite relevant, and we are able, among many other things, to anticipate the future, and therefore, as we sit back, we're able to prepare better for that. And the time goes straight, and we are saying you don't have to start with all the stories like we did, even just one story for one particular cause, possibly that is more relevant would be a good starting point. And of course, the lessons. One of the key challenge we have is that when it comes to assessing the students, most often we assess them, and the grading is sort of forms part of their end of semester marks. But for this case, it was a bit of a challenge, and therefore we saw a bit of laxity, especially from the students, because they knew they wouldn't be assessed. So sort of having even some of these tests form part of the assessments then would be very important. A guiding tool, and I'm happy that is already underway, because if you're starting off, then you sort of need to know how do I go about this. And of starting small, and also enjoying the whole process. Thank you.
Thank you.